Authentic community wrapped around a spiritual core. That's how Dr. Matthew Gamble, my former brother-in-law and the former pastor of a Californian church, describes his core value. It's his true north, the ideal that steers his decision-making at all levels of his life. It's the core value that inspired him and his former wife Susan to turn their lives upside down, ushering in what had been a truly best of times and worst of times. Now, several years ago, the two of them had been living in a place they considered paradise, Florida. Matthew had started a nonprofit organization for which he'd been traveling globally for years. Susan had just finished her residency as a doctor at Yale University. Together, they had just welcomed their first child and were raising her in a beautiful home only a mile away from a popular beach. Their life in the Sunshine State was, as Matthew put it, storybook perfect. But there was one catch. Susan and Matthew were not connected to community. Well, not really. They both came from a faith tradition that was extraordinarily meaningful to them. Where they were, there was simply no spiritual community in which they felt comfortable or understood. Now, if you know Matthew like I know Matthew, that's a big problem. Matthew is a passionate networker and communicator, and nothing stokes his inner fire like connecting with people. He lives to make contact, win trust, and build meaningful community. Isolation and Matthew are not a good mix. No, not at all. But one day, a solution to the Gamble situation arrived in the form of two simultaneous job offers. One was for Susan at a hospital, the other was for Matthew at a small church. Incredibly, both positions were located in the very same Napa Valley community, thousands of miles away from Florida. Initially, when they traveled to California for their interviews, the Gambles weren't taking with the place. Florida's lush natural beauty had captured their hearts. They had family and friends where they were living. Plus, the cost of living in California was daunting. Were these jobs worth the dislocation and the lifestyle changes? But once they returned home to Florida, Matthew took a walk on the beach to pray, and suddenly the decision seemed clear. A door was opening for him and Susan. Something bigger than his qualms was drawing him to Napa Valley, where the church he was being asked to lead was on the verge of being shuttered. That church's leadership felt he could inject their spiritual community with desperately needed new life. Matthew felt ready to find out if that was true. Authentic community wrapped around a spiritual core was calling him. So the Gambles went to California, and what unfolded was, according to Matthew, the hardest season of his life by far. The church was nestled in a small community with fewer than 1,000 people. The hospital where Susan began working was adjacent to the church, built by the same church pioneers over 100 years ago. And what the Gambles represented was a modern and, for some, unsettling, radical approach to that faith's tradition. Culturally, what I stand for rubs some people the wrong way, explains Matthew. For others, it's very refreshing, inviting, and redeeming. But I've never faced personal persecution like I have living here. I'm a threat to certain people. In pursuit of authentic community wrapped around a spiritual core, Matthew has helped to revitalize a previously dying church, which became, under his leadership, simply known as the Haven. With his 21st century approach to a legacy denomination, many left his building. Still more began attending and formed vital smaller groups within it. The church is now nurturing pockets of true friendship that are living out the vision of community Matthew has long dreamed about. The Haven lives up to its name. It's now a judgment-free zone where people are safe to share and explore. But the flip side of that church's revitalization was Matthew's imaginization of the broader community. He has been the target of painful vitriol and gossip. It's been an absolute firestorm, he tells me. Part of this firestorm entailed what Matthew refers to as a nervous breakdown that forced him to go on an administrative leave. He was having heart palpitations, couldn't sleep or eat or breathe right, and much of the time he wanted to be vaporized. Despite all of that, Matthew sees the past years of his life as some of his best. They had been extremely refining and very life-giving, he says. The firestorm of judgment he experienced in Napa Valley, so acutely painful for an individual who delights in winning people over, has acted as a refining fire. The pain has teased out and then started to ameliorate particular character flaws. It drove personal demons out of hiding. Matthew describes the way a goldsmith knows he has burned the impurities out of gold when he or she can see his or her reflection clearly there in it. Napa Valley, and Matthew's pursuit of authentic community wrapped around a spiritual core, has shown Matthew his own reflection. Matthew knows that certain people in the community continue to speak negatively about him. Although it feels like a punch to the gut, it also shows him how far he has come. Years ago, any negative comment would have consumed him, echoing in his heart for days and leaving him deflated. Today, he can stand up to the stings and barbs because he knows his community at the Haven sees him differently. Matthew is actively involved in recovery circles, which teach freedom from addictions through working the famous 12 steps. Central to the recovery movement is a belief in a higher power, or a power greater than ourselves, that can help us when we can't help ourselves. And he believes that the night he walked on the beach in Florida and decided to accept the job in Napa Valley, it was because his higher power was leading him. Matthew believes his higher power wanted him to help create a place of safety, a place of authentic community, for the very people now rejecting him in Napa Valley. And in that process, Matthew has shown himself what it means to need a place of safety. Above all else, walking through the firestorm that resulted from pursuing authentic community has shown Matthew what his core value truly means. The way I see it, he says, if there's going to be someone at the helm of a place called the Haven, they had better known what a haven is all about and what it's needed for. And I do now, and I always will.